The black void of space was never truly empty. Even in the places where starlight seemed to die, and no warmth touched the skin of a ship's hull, life drifted like forgotten echoes. Commander Elias Rourke had spent 23 years charting those shadows, watching humanity's reach extend beyond Mars, beyond Europa, clawing its way into the abyss one breath at a time. But in all those years, nothing had prepared him for the Signal 3 pulses. One long, too short, not natural, not human, bleeding through the static like a whisper from the grave. It came from the Orion Fringe, beyond the mapped sectors, where the last survey drones had vanished. His crew was gone now, lost to reassignment or the slow pull of Earth's comforts, but Elias remained, haunted by that signal that no one believed in, flying the Solace alone through the darkness. Because someone or something was still calling, the station appeared on the edge of his sensors like a broken crown adrift in the stellar winds. Fractured metal arcs glowing faint blue, their design nothing like human architecture. Its surface bore scars like claw marks, as if something had tried to tear it open from the inside. His ship's a eye-pinch minimal life signs, barely above background noise, but life nonetheless. That was why he landed. That was why he stepped into the unknown, boots echoing against alien alloy floors, pulse tight in his throat, carrying only a translation module and the battered journal of his father, a man who had once told him. The real monsters aren't out there. Eli, they're the ones who forget what it means to care. The interior was colder than space itself, humming with forgotten machinery and flickering lights like dying stars. Then he saw her, if she could be called that, slumped against the wall, skin pale as ice, eyes like twin galaxies swirling with violet light, too large for any human face. Her body was humanoid, slender, fragile, clad in torn fabric that glowed. Faintly, symbols etched along her arms pulsing faint blue, unreadable, yet aching with meaning. She was trembling, eyes wide with something Elias recognized instantly, across species, across world sphere. And there, beside her, scrawled in desperate, jagged lines along the metal wall, was a message, written not in ink, but in blood. They erased me. My name, gone. Help. The translation module hissed and crackled, struggling to parse the dying language, but her expression needed no words. She looked at him like the last ember of hope in an endless winter, and despite every protocol screaming at him to retreat, Elias took a slow, careful step forward, the unknown curling around him like a storm ready to break. Asterisk Elias stood frozen for a moment, feeling the vast weight of silence pressing in from every direction, heavier than the artificial gravity beneath his boots. The alien girl or woman perhaps watched him with eyes that shimmered like nebulae trapped in tears, her slight form hunched against the wall as though trying to disappear into the cold metal itself. Despite everything, the impossible structure of the station, the ruin carved into its bones, the blood-written plea staining its walls, what struck him most was how small she looked. Small, fragile, terrified, and alone. His mind reeled with the consequences of contact, the regulations, the endless debriefings and sterile interrogations waiting back on Earth, but they faded like dust under the deeper truth, humming beneath his ribs. She was suffering. And if humanity's reach into the stars meant anything, it meant they didn't abandon those in need, no matter how strange their face. With a studying breath, Elias knelt, lowering his body slowly so she wouldn't feel threatened. He set the translation module gently on the floor between them, its surface flickering as it strained to capture her language's alien cadence. Her pupils dilated in alarm at the movement, limbs twitching as though considering flight, but she didn't bolt. That thread of courage, thin as it was, pulled at something buried deep in Elias's chest, a memory of his younger sister clinging to him after their parents' funeral. Small, lost, desperate for someone to understand. He'd failed her then, walking away into space, chasing stars instead of staying. He wouldn't fail again. It's okay, he said softly, his voice rough from recycled air and too many lonely months drifting between worlds. I won't hurt you. The translator crackled, distorting the words into something warped but faintly musical, carrying the shape of comfort if not the perfect meaning. She flinched at first but didn't retreat, her glowing eyes studying him like he was an impossible puzzle. Then, with slow, halting effort, she lifted one trembling hand and pressed it against her chest, fingers curling over the pulsing lines etched into her skin. The module stuttered, struggling to bridge the linguistic chasm, but it caught enough fragments to project a fractured message into the space between them. Name, taken, erased, alone, please. Her voice through the machine was haunting, crystalline, like whispers wrapped in starlight, and Elias's throat tightened. He reached for the journal at his belt, the one relic he carried from Earth, its battered cover etched with fading letters. Rourke, the name his father had given him. The name that tethered him to generations of stubborn, flawed, hopeful humanity. He held it out slowly, the universal gesture of offering. "My name," he said firmly, tapping the cover. "Elias, you're not alone now." For the first time, her gaze softened, though the pain didn't leave her eyes. She touched the blood-scrawled words beside her, fingers lingering on the phrase, "my namagon," as if the loss weighed heavier than the broken station or the unknown horrors clawing at the edges of their meeting. But there was something else, now a flicker of trust, fragile as the first spark in the dark, and Elias knew without question that the moment he turned to leave, the void would devour her. Whatever had erased her name, whatever had torn this station apart, it wasn't done. And neither was he. Asterisk time seemed to fracture around them, moments stretching thin like the veil between worlds. The station groaned in the distance, faint metallic echoes rolling through the forgotten halls like the dying sigh of something ancient and broken. But within the small, cold chamber, a quiet understanding bloomed between the two souls adrift. Elias remained kneeling, watching the trembling figure before him, this alien girl with eyes, full of galaxies and skin carved with glowing lines that pulsed in rhythm with her shallow breaths. She clutched at her chest as though the missing name, the one stripped from her, still throbbed like an open wound beneath her fragile ribs. For a long moment, neither spoke. The translator flickered weakly, struggling with the complexity of her language, but Elias didn't need words to recognize pain when it filled the air like smoke. He had seen it in the eyes of maroon colonists, in the quiet despair of soldiers drifting too long between battlefronts, in the cracked reflection of his own face after every funeral Earth couldn't bear to remember. And now he saw it herein. The hunched shoulders, the haunted stare, the desperate plea scrawled in blood along alien walls. The loss of identity was more than a forgotten word. It was erasure, the cutting of roots, the brutal theft of self. Humanity understood that. They had carried their flags, their songs, their names across the stars like shields because they knew how fragile history could be when the void came clawing. Elias eased closer, slowly enough to avoid spooking her, then set the worn journal down beside them both. The name Rourke stared up from its battered cover, a small defiance against the vast, empty dark. Her gaze dropped to it, curious, cautious, her fingers twitching as if the urge to touch word, with the fear of one more betrayal. But then she reached out, pale fingers brushing the faded leather. Her skin shimmered faintly beneath the station's flickering lights, and Elias noticed the etched symbols along her arms pulsing brighter, threads of soft blue illuminating the scars hidden beneath them. She pointed at the journal, the translation module crackling as she whispered through it. "Name, safe." Her voice trembled like fragile glass. Elias nodded firmly. "Safe," he promised, his voice steady despite the ache curling through him. He tapped his chest, then the journal. "Elias, name stays." His hand hovered over his heart, then extended gently toward her. "Yours too. We keep it together." The translator struggled, distorting the words into fractured melodies, but the meaning carried through the promise of shared history, of defiance in the face of erasure. Her eyes glistened with something raw, shimmering, like the stars that no longer reached this forsaken place. Carefully, she pressed her hand over his, the contact feather light yet electric, the symbols along her arms flaring with sudden, vibrant light. A name, faint and fragmented, filtered through the translator, a melody rather than a word, impossible to replicate with human tongues. But Elias didn't flinch at its complexity. Instead, he committed it to memory with the same fierce devotion he'd given every name on the memorial walls back home. She sagged with relief, the tension in her limbs loosening, her expression softening for the first time. Beneath the scars and exhaustion, there was a glimmer of gratitude, brittle but real. And Elias realized then that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't technology or firepower. It was the relentless refusal to let others be forgotten, to carry the names, to tell the stories, to hold on to one another in the dark. The station's walls groaned again, louder this time, vibrations shivering through the floor beneath them. Danger still circled, unseen but closing in. But for the first time since stepping aboard, Elias wasn't alone. They weren't alone. The lights above them flickered again, this time with a jagged, pulsing rhythm that sent a chill down Elias's spine. It wasn't the random malfunction of a dying station. It was deliberate, patterned, like a warning encoded in the very bones of the place. The alien girl, her name still hanging unspoken in the hollow between them, flinched as the hum deepened, eyes wide, shimmering with ancient terror. Elias straightened, scanning the walls, the trembling floor panels, the fractured ceiling overhead. His hand hovered near the small plasma cutter at his belt, not in threat, but readiness. He could feel it, the pressure of unseen eyes, the taste of something wrong saturating the air like static before a storm. The translation module sputtered, catching fragments of her frantic words as she pressed trembling fingers against the glowing lines on her arm, symbols flaring with urgent light. They, coming, erase many, erase more. Her voice fractured like glass underfoot, and Elias's gut twisted with the weight of understanding. This wasn't an isolated tragedy. This station was only the grave marker. The real horror lingered in the darkness beyond, still hunting, still silencing. His mind raced, piecing together the scars across the alien walls, the brutal claw marks, the message scrawled in desperate blood. They erased me. Who? He asked, voice low, steady despite the tightness building in his chest. The translator crackled, glitching, but managed enough. Her eyes, vast and impossibly deep, locked onto his, shimmering with a mixture of fear and fury. She gestured toward the stars beyond the shattered viewports, her fingers curling as if clutching invisible chains. The Ones Who Unmake, the translator rasped, barely holding the delicate, haunting melody of her language. Her voice faltered, but the truth bled through. Not death. Worse. Take memory, take family of empty shell. Her hands hovered near her temples, trembling, as if remembering the void clawing inside her mind. Elias felt the chill of those words seep beneath his skin. To lose a name was to lose identity, to unravel the thread connecting existence to meaning. The Ones Who Unmake weren't simple killers, they were thieves of history, devourers of legacy, architects of oblivion. He thought of Earth's wars, of tyrants who rewrote the past, of the libraries burned, the cultures buried. But this was cosmic, methodical, erasure on a scale humanity had never faced. The flickering lights stuttered again, brighter now, accompanied by a low, thrumming sound vibrating the station's walls. The girl, her fragile form quivering, pressed closer to him, her glowing markings flaring with instinctual fear. Elias shifted his stance, shielding her without hesitation, the instinct to protect roaring louder than the fear whispering at the back of his mind. He'd seen soldiers break under less, but this demanded resolve. His father's voice echoed through him. We carry each other's names, son. That's how we survive the void. The translation module crackled with one last fragmented transmission, her voice laced with despair and warning. They erased Starswell worlds, me people. She clenched her hand over the glowing lines etched into her skin, where her name should have burned bright, but now dimmed beneath the scars. Only few remember. Her voice broke, and Elias understood. She wasn't just a survivor, she was a witness, carrying the fading embers of a civilization devoured by the Ones Who Unmake. A jagged noise echoed from the distant corridors, metal warping, shadows thickening, the suffocating sense of something ancient and merciless drawing near. The station, once a beacon of unknown civilization, was now a mausoleum wrapped in the whispers of those who'd been erased, but Elias wasn't leaving her behind. He tightened his grip on the journal, heart pounding with defiance, every fiber of his humanity blazing against the darkness. The Ones Who Unmake could steal names, silence histories, unravel legacies, but they hadn't met him yet. And they hadn't met Earth. Not this time, he muttered, eyes hardening as the distant shadows crept closer. We remember. We fight. Asterisk, the temperature dropped like a stone as the corridor beyond them pulsed with shadows, thickening into shapes Elias's eyes couldn't fully comprehend. They weren't solid forms, exactly, more like distortions, ripples in reality itself, bending light and air into wrong angles and sickening warps. The Ones Who Unmake had arrived, and their presence was not merely physical. It was like watching memory itself unravel, the space around them peeling in faint waves, as if names, thoughts, and history bled into nothingness with each passing second. His mind recoiled instinctively, but he forced his focus tighter, clinging to the simplest, purest anchor he had left, his name. Elias Rourke. The one gift his father had given him that no void could strip away. The alien girl, small, trembling, etched in glowing scars, clutched at his arm now, fingers ice cold, eyes wide with terror, but also something harder buried beneath defiance, brittle but burning. Her markings flared brighter as the distortions closed in, whispering voices hissing through the walls, fragments of forgotten languages and broken names swirling like ash in the stale air. The station groaned beneath the weight of them, metal, bending in places, ancient structures fraying like torn cloth at the edges. If they stayed, they'd be next stripped of their names, Their stories, their very existence, turned to silent husks floating through the dark. Elias's ship, Solace, was still docked in the outer bay. Systems ready, barely shielded enough to jump them beyond the immediate fringe. But the corridors between here and Salvation stretched like a maze. And those things, they moved through space like shadows swimming through oil. Silent, formless predators erasing reality one breath at a time. He tightened his grip on the journal at his hip, the worn leather burning warm in his palm, a lifeline to every ancestor who had stared into the abyss and dared to keep living. She pressed her other hand to his chest, palm flat over his heart, glowing lines along her wrist shimmering faintly. Through the translator's fractured static, her voice rose, a fragile melody, stitched together with meaning beyond words. They see names, hunt them. Her gaze hardened. But wide years inside stars? Her words stumbled with the foreign shapes of human speech, but Elias understood enough. Hide his name, hide her name. Run, survive, and in doing so, protect the flame of identity from being snuffed out. But the choice wasn't simple. Her people's records, the fragments of memory, the etched symbols lining these walls were fading, warping as the Ones Who Unmake advanced. He could flee, save himself and her, carry their names beyond this haunted place. But doing so meant abandoning the last written history of her kind to oblivion. Everything she was, everything her people had been reduced to whispers, twisted, echoes lost in cosmic decay. The coward's way out was easy. Humanity had been accused of that before, running, hiding, forgetting inconvenient truths to save their own skins. But the part of Elias carved from Earth's scars, from burning cities and starward dreams, wouldn't bend. His jaw clenched as the shadows pressed closer, the hum of unmaking vibrating against his bones. A hard decision settled in his chest. Like an anchor, he'd get her to safety, yes. But he'd also fight for what mattered. He wouldn't let the Ones Who Unmake devour another story, another name, another soul etched into history. Even if it meant bleeding for strangers, risking the fragile flame of his own legacy. That was what humanity did at its best. They didn't just survive. They preserved, they carried each other through the dark. We're writing your name in the stars, he promised her, voice low, fierce with quiet fire. But we're taking your people's history too. No one erases you again. The ship was waiting. The shadows were closing in. The stakes had never been higher. The shadows thickened like smoke made of memory itself, twisting down the corridor in a slow, dreadful tide, unraveling light, devouring sound, bending every shape until even the walls seemed to bleed into the formless dark. Elias stood his ground. The alien girl pressed close behind him, her hand still resting over his chest, where his heartbeat hammered like defiance made flesh. The journal hung at his side, its worn leather cover a crude shield against the cosmic terror closing in. But it wasn't the book itself that held power, it was what it meant. Every page, every scribbled name, every recorded story bled with the raw, stubborn refusal of humanity to forget, to surrender, to let the void claim what mattered. The Ones Who Unmake whispered through the air, faint, layered voices like overlapping. Static and silk, fragments of forgotten languages twisting into nausea. His skin prickled as they approached, their forms both there and not, ripples of broken space warping around them. The translator module hissed uselessly now, overwhelmed, but Elias didn't need it anymore. The message was carved into every molecule, the scene, their purpose, their hunger, the way they peeled away existence like bark from a tree, stripping identity until only empty shells remained. He could run. The docking bay was just 3 turns down, emergency bulkheads creaking but intact. But if he ran now, the archives, the etched symbols covering these walls, the glowing lines of her people's history would fall silent forever. He thought of Earth's libraries burning, of ancient tongues erased by war, of cultures suffocated under conquest. And he thought of the promise he'd made to her, to himself, to every forgotten soul who'd stared into the dark and begged to be remembered. Low, guttural hum rattled the floor as the shadows surged forward, their edges peeling at reality itself. The alien girl, her name still fragile on his tongue, pressed a small device into his palm, her eyes fierce now despite the fear swimming beneath. The translation module flickered one final time, barely translating her desperate plea. Light, memory. Fight them with name. Elias clenched the device, recognizing the raw, dangerous energy pulsing inside. A memory projector, ancient technology, alien craftsmanship, but it resonated with a simple, brutal logic. Project the story, carve it into space. Anchor identity so deep, even the void can't unmake it. The Ones Who Unmake closed in, their tendrils coiling, gnawing at thought itself. His vision blurred, memories flickering, names slipping at the edges, but he held on. To his name, to hers. To every blood-stained word in the journal at his side. With a snarl of stubborn humanity, he slammed the device into the floor, triggering the projection. Light burst outward like a newborn star, searing through the shadows, illuminating the etched walls, flooding the corridor with cascading symbols. Names, memories, her people's legacy bleeding into space like fire defying a black hole. The ones who unmake recoiled, their formlessness fracturing, hissing as the raw pulse of remembered identity clawed at their impossible forms, but they didn't retreat fully. They fought back, pressing, twisting, their whispers louder, their claws gnawing at the edges of his mind. Elias staggered, the searing light from the projector burning, but the shadows still writhing. It wasn't enough. The memory projection needed fuel, needed a living spark to anchor it beyond the reach of oblivion. His journal. His own story. With a raw, defiant roar, Elias tore the book free, slamming it onto the projection's core, the pages igniting with golden fire, the etched letters Rourke, his father's handwriting, generations of names spiraling upward, wrapping around the alien symbols, fusing into a storm of history, memory, and unrelenting defiance. The shadows screamed fractured, recoiling, shattering under the combined fury of two legacies made one. For the first time, the ones who unmake faltered, their hold cracking, their whispers dissolving like ash on solar winds. Elias collapsed to his knees, gasping, body trembling, but victorious. Beside him, the alien girl glowed, her markings flaring. Bright, her name restored in burning lines along her skin. The walls pulsed with etched stories, saved now, carved into the station, bleeding into the stars. They had stood their ground. And they had won not with weapons, but with memory, with names, with the oldest, fiercest weapon humanity had ever wielded, the refusal to forget. Asterisk, the silence that followed was vast, stretching across the broken station like the exhale of some forgotten god. The shadows were gone, the ones who unmake retreating into whatever cosmic rift had birthed them, their formless whispers fractured by the raw defiance of memory written in light. Elias knelt among the ruins, breath shallow, muscles aching with exhaustion deeper than bone. His journal smoldered softly on the deck, pages charred, but the name Rourke still etched faintly into the cover, stubborn as humanity's first footprint. On an alien world. His hands trembled as he picked it up, heart clenched with bittersweet pride. A lifetime of stories had bled into the projection, burned into the walls, mingling with the history of a species he'd only just met, but it had worked. They had remembered. They had defied the dark. The alien girl, her name now whole, and shimmering along the glowing lines carved into her skin, stood beside him, small but unbroken, her violet eyes reflecting the swirling holograms still dancing. In the air, names in impossible languages spiraled across the walls, etched into space itself like constellations reborn. Her gaze locked onto him, and for the first time since he'd found her curled in fear and blood, she smiled. It was fragile, tentative, but radiant as starlight breaking through an endless void. Elias forced himself to stand, every joint protesting, but the fire in his chest steady as gravity. He extended his hand, palm open, fingers steady. She took it without hesitation this time, her grip cool but strong, the faint pulse of her markings synchronizing with the quiet rhythm of his heartbeat. Together they moved through the corridor, past walls now alive with history, stories shining in faint blue threads that stretched along the metal like vines of forgotten knowledge reclaiming the station dot outside the viewport. The stars burned distant but defiant, and for the first time in what felt like years, Elias didn't feel alone in the dark. They reached the docking bay, the Solace waiting, its battered hull scratched but steady. The alien girl paused, glancing back at the etched walls, her fingers lingering against the glowing symbols. Through the translator, her voice rippled soft but sure. Wrote them in stars. Her gaze returned to him, fierce with hope. Your name, too. Elias's throat tightened, emotion raw in his chest. His name, her name, their stories, all now part of something bigger, impossible to erase. Humanity's legacy wasn't just steel ships and stubborn explorers. It was this. The willingness to bleed for strangers, to risk everything to preserve memory, to write forgotten names across the stars where no void could touch them. As they boarded the ship, systems humming. To life, the faint traces of her people's story shone behind them, a promise etched into space. And as they drifted away, carried on solar winds and human stubbornness, Elias looked at her, this fragile, resilient survivor, and vowed silently, no one erases you again. Not while humanity remembers how to fight, how to care, how to carry each other through the dark. They vanished into the stars together, carrying names, carrying history, writing defiance across the infinite void, one star, one story at a time. The end.